All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, you might have noticed a bit of a consistent theme here in the way our government has responded to the coronavirus health and economic crisis. At every single turn, they have bent over backwards to do the bidding of large corporations and Wall Street financiers while throwing crumbs to small businesses and, of course, to workers. For good measure, they will provide an occasional attaboy pat on the back for those essential workers who are literally risking their lives to keep our society from crumbling. So you won't be surprised to learn that now the Trump administration has decided to do the bidding of the meat processing industry by invoking the Defense Production Act in order to compel the reopening of meat processing plants. So here's the story. 2 days after multinational food conglomerate Tyson's Inc. took out full-page ads warning of a food shortage, Trump, ever responsive to the wants and desires of the wealthy, went right along with doing exactly what they asked him to do. Now, don't forget, when the shoe was on the other foot and business execs did not want the Defense Production Act invoked to compel production of critical equipment like ventilators, for example, masks, gowns, essential items, they dragged their feet, waiting and waiting while crucial time ticked by. But here, Tyson snaps their fingers and lickety-split, they get their way. On the other hand, ask a small business owner you know how quickly the government has responded to their needs and see what they tell you. Now, let's be clear what we're talking about here. The reason that meat processing plants have been shut down is because they've been epicenters of coronavirus outbreaks. According to the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, more than 5,000 workers in the industry have been sickened, and at least 20 have died. It's no surprise, as one Smithfield worker described to the Washington Post, on the cut floor, we use knives to butcher up to 1,100 pigs an hour as they come down a mechanical line into specific cuts like a loin. To keep up with the speed of the line, workers stand so closely together that they can easily be cut by the person next to them. It was a dangerous, hard job every day before the coronavirus, but managers never blatantly asked me to risk my life just by showing up until this pandemic. Now, ordering these plants to reopen will result in more worker illness and more deaths. Additional safety precautions have been suggested, but not required. Vice President Pence had the audacity to call these workers heroes. Well, if they're essential, where's their hazard pay? Where's the basic care and concern for their lives? Your words mean nothing when you are sending them to risk their lives on the front lines of a crisis without much more than lip service to protect them and their families. And by the way, the outbreaks which have caused so many of these plant closures were completely avoidable if only these companies were just slightly less filled with unconscionable levels of greed. The Washington Post had a jaw-dropping report on the way JBS, Tyson's, and Smithfield utterly failed their workers in their quest to keep up production speed in service of the almighty dollar. According to the Post, at plant after plant, workers and journalists have found little protective gear, little to no implementation of social distancing, workers who were told to continue working even though they were sick. At one JBS plant where more than 100 workers were ultimately infected, a local analysis found that 64% of those infected workers continued to work while they were symptomatic. A Tyson's food plant in Waterloo, Iowa, has fueled a 900% increase in that county's coronavirus case count. A former Smithfield worker told the Post, quote, "If you're not in a casket, they want you there. All they were worried about was making sure we were coming to work." Or, as one protesting worker memorably quipped, "We out here risking our lives for chicken." Look, it's scary to think about disruptions in the food chain. It makes us uncomfortable, especially those of us who live in the cosseted PMC because we have the luxury of pretending like things aren't really that bad, of not dealing directly with the pain of job loss or terror of being evicted. And the more affluent have even been spared the worst of the health worries because we have the luxury of working from home. A meat shortage is an in-your-face, unavoidable reminder that this whole thing is screwed up and that literally nothing is normal. But the truth is, temporarily cutting back on our meat consumption, it's not going to kill us. Forcing these workers back into infection hotbeds could very well kill them. And this is where we truly see laid bare the values of this society, and in particular, this president. They put the needs of the affluent to have as many pork loins as they can eat, lining the cases of their local Whole Foods over the lives of working class people. And they certainly put the needs and desires of corporate executives determined to continue risking their workers' lives over those workers' lives. Now, I've long said The real divide in this nation is between those who are treated as human beings and those who are not. In normal times, these workers are all but invisible, slaving away for low wages in brutal and dangerous conditions. Now our president is forced to see them, and he has one message for them: get back to work. Will they comply? Well, I would never deign to tell these workers what they should do, but I do hope that they realize they have real power here. They refuse to work and supply chains crumble. I can promise you they will have the nation's attention real quick. And if they decide to strike, if they decide to say screw you to this president, to their greedy corporate managers, and refuse to butcher and risk their lives for chicken and pork and beef, I, for one, will stand in solidarity with them all the way. And Sagar, this isn't a one-off. We've tracked this pattern from the beginning. This president has been listening to corporate executives. He changed his immigration order to cater to their needs. We have this example. He's dragging his feet with regards to making sure that we have production capacity in the U.S. for medical supplies in the future, all because of what corporate executives are telling him he should be doing.
There hasn't been consistency in the message because, and we saw this, you and I were talking about this right before we came on the show, that there's a Buy American order, which I think we both strongly support.
Absolutely.
For medical supplies and these other things that Peter Navarro and some of the other nationalists in the cabinet are advocating for.
That
and
90% of Americans
right, 90%, literally.
I mean, I don't have to take a poll.
90-10 issue. And you have elements within there from the Treasury Secretary and others who don't want to do it because they have big business in their ears saying that we shouldn't. It's just another one of these things. And when I look at this, it's a massive policy failure. You're right. A lot of it is on Trump, but a lot of it is a lot to go around. I mean, we look at Congress, which has refused to pass any of these hazard pay conditions, any PPE requirements. But the broader thing is, when did we stop thinking that when the government gives you money, or if the government's going to nationalize your industry, it's basically nationalize Defense Production Act and pump money into your liquidity and stuff into your balance sheet, that you don't get to give up anything. That's the crazy part of all of this. I have no. By the way, I do think we still need meat. Like, obviously, this is America. We need meat to continue to come on the shelves. But if we're going to provide them, or if we're going to make them stay open, then I think we should also have to provide some of the safety and security of that, some of the hazard pay. But none of this is being discussed in D.C. And I don't even actually. I mean, I see an outcry from the unions. Do you see anybody like fighting for them with like Nancy Pelosi
Not really.
or Chuck Schumer? Like, honestly, no. And this is the other thing. How is it that our meat supply industry is like this in the first place? Oh, it turns out that it's exactly like every other sector of our economy. It's way too big. There needs to be it's all a transnational. A Brazilian company owns one plant like packaging here, so they get to call it made in the USA. I mean,
yeah. No, they treat their workers not as human beings, but as just a disposable line item. That's what they are.
Is a Chinese company, right? Like, this is a Chinese conglomerate. I can go all the way down the line, which is that we have these like multinational meat industry, which is completely devoid of actual Americans. They treat workers as individual widgets and commodities, and nobody's really fighting for their interests in D.C. They want meat to continue to go on the shelves, but as you said, and because of where I come from, we have meat processing plants. I'm from Texas. Butcher.
Yeah.
I know how nasty these places are in the best of times.
Oh, it's one of the hardest, most difficult, dangerous jobs you could possibly imagine. I mean, some of these workers at least have a union to represent their interests. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't even hear anything. Yeah. Many don't. That's absolutely right. And again, go back to the root of the problem. Why were there such terrible outbreaks at these plants to start with? It's because the companies were too cheap to space people out of the line. Maybe butcher 900 hogs an hour instead of 1,100. Make sure workers have protective masks. If someone has a fever, send them home. I mean, because they wouldn't even relent on production at that level. Instead, they had to close these plants completely down. But I think it says it all on the implementation of the Defense Production Act. On the one hand, when corporate executives are saying, we don't want to make these benefits, like, don't make us do it. We promise. We're going to do our best. Don't worry. You don't have to do this. Trump drags his feet. Tyson's Foods puts a one-page ad out saying, we got to reopen these plants, and like that, Defense Production Act is instituted.
And look, they want their liability shield. Fine. I don't actually have a problem with that. But again, it's that if you can give them the liability shield, but there has to be conditions that come with this. Because if we understand that Tyson's Food and the meat supply chain is an industry of the national good, then they have to act like it, right? It's not in the national interest actually to have Brazilian holding companies and Chinese holding companies and all these other, corporatized industries industries or corporatized elements that are owning a critical part of how we all eat. That's actually terrible. This is actually a good spotlight into how much of our food is grown, the agriculture industry, and so much of that.
Oh, yeah.
But I agree. And look, like I said, I think they need a liability shield. I do think they are a national industry, and I think that these workers also deserve their protection.
Right.
It's not mutually exclusive.
But listen, here's the other piece, though.
Yeah.
And the Iowa governor came out and said this, that because these plants are being compelled to reopen, any worker who's concerned about their safety and doesn't show is going to be considered to have voluntarily quit. What does that mean?
Yeah,
it means they don't get unemployment.
Exactly.
It means they are left high and dry because they dared to challenge their corporate masters and not come to work to risk their lives for low wages. They will be left out in the cold without even unemployment benefits. It is unconscionable.
That is unconscionable. And, it's amazing because it also just goes to show what we've talked about here from the beginning is it's a choice to run things this way.
Yes.
It's a choice in order to treat people this way. And if these are critical industries, then we should act like it. And I've said that from the very beginning.
Absolutely.
But what the failure is they can't even do that. They shut us down. They put us all out of work. And they can't even give masks to doctors, right? They can't even get ventilators. Like, this is how inept so much of the government responds. This isn't just the federal government. This is the whole everything. And it just shows how, hollow our entire, all of our institutions that were tasked with protecting us with this. And I think that's the greatest failure of it all. And this is just one more spotlight into it, right?
Yep.
Last month we were talking about ventilators. Now we're talking about this. It's just going to keep going down the line as the downstream effects of this closure and all these plant closures and the coronavirus and everything continue to impact our society.
That is absolutely right, and you see who this government works for.
Yeah.
Next on Rising, one neoliberal economist the Democratic Party, for some reason, keeps turning to Larry Summers. Gotta love him. Huffington Post senior reporter Zach Carter is going to tell us why that is so dangerous.